I'm not really asking, we'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with me. Be free. Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Lightning strikes by my window, hits my chest right in the morning, like a warning. Could have slept here for days. I felt your heartbeat, felt your...
Well, hello, everybody. It is Sunday night, and it's time for One Word. I'm Tim Riddle. It has been a crazy few hours. Actually, I'm sorry that we're a little late tonight. We're 8 o'clock instead of our normal 7 o'clock time frame. Had a meeting a little bit earlier, and that part was fine. I was with some people that I love being with, but I rushed back, and we sort of tore the office apart this weekend. And that beautiful backdrop that you see, that wall, my son worked really hard today to put that together, all weekend actually. So thanks, Fletcher, for doing that. I appreciate it. And but we put everything together. So if something doesn't work, it's because I forgot something. So, but we're here, right? We're live. Hey, before we go any further, I want to ask you, if you don't mind, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you kind of click that follow button, if you would, subscribe button, I guess you would say. And there's a little bell beside it. If you click on that, that also might be nice. It'll give you a little reminder. Trying to get up to 100 followers or subscribers, I guess you would say, on YouTube. So a little personal announcement there. If you can do that, I'm getting close. Got about 40 or so left to go, but appreciate if you just kind of let people know if they'll just click that button. What it basically does, it allows me to get the domain of youtube.com/Tim Riddle, try to get some of these messages out to a few more people. So tonight, here we are. We're back talking about one word that we get together and we just sort of talk about for the week. It might be a blind spot that we have. You know, we believe that blind spots are removed by shining some light on something. And I don't know about you, but there's a lot of noise that we can have, during our week that removes us our ability to focus, and a lot of words and a lot of input and a lot of data with our phones and our computers and the news, everything. And so we just want to scale it back, just kind of carve away all the layers and say, you know what, tonight we just want to talk about one word that if we put a little light on it, it might help our leadership. It might help us grow, might help us just become a better human being. So that's what we're doing. Now, tonight's word is a little bit different. In fact, I would bet you that you've probably not used this word much in your vocabulary. In fact, you probably never really even thought about it that much, but it's a word that I want to talk about, and so it'll be fun to kind of dive into the meaning and so forth. And so here we go. The word is called individualization. Individualization. Now, I've got to move something out of the way here. I want to give you a definition of that word so that you'll be able to understand kind of how to engage it in a minute with comments and so forth. And so this word was new to me. It showed up several years ago in an inventory, one of those personality inventories that I took, and it actually showed up as one of my strengths. But I think I came by it the hard way, and I'll share a little bit of that with you. But let's go to the definition. Here's the definition. Individualization means that you're intrigued with the unique qualities of each person. You have a gift for figuring out how different people can work together productively. So that's really what it comes down to. That's the definition. It comes from the book, the Clifton Strength Finder Inventory. It comes from that book. If some of you are familiar with that, you probably are familiar with that word. For whatever reason, it showed up on my inventory, and as I said, I think I learned about it the hard way. And let me explain that a little bit. Let me unpack that some. So here's a kind of a neat cartoon. It says, we're not that organized, but we know where every person is, everybody is. And that was my experience, not being organized. I actually kind of feel like I am pretty organized. I actually enjoy being organized. I enjoy being strategic. I enjoy showing up on time and so forth. But when I was in the marketplace, when I had a textile business and I was doing some business where we were collaborating with some other people. So there was a gentleman I worked with. He wasn't an employee of mine, but he was a person that we worked together on some projects. And I remember that I used to get so frustrated because if I asked him to send me a report, a lot of times he didn't send it. If he told me he was going to call me back, a lot of times he wouldn't, and he would show up at meetings late. And I remember sometimes I was beating my head against the wall, and I was so frustrated. It's like, why can't he be? This is not that hard. Why can't he be as organized as I am? I mean, this is just not a difficult thing. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what it was, Spirit of God or something, or, one of those things hit me. And it was as if I kind of said to myself, Tim, why are you trying to make him into you? Why are you trying to make him into somebody he is not? And I began to think about his talents and his gifts, which were radically different than mine. In other words, he was incredible in a room full of people. He was great at negotiating. He was a tremendous salesperson. He was somebody, if you wanted somebody at the table to help you negotiate, he's who you wanted at the table. He was very comfortable with a person who was of high stature, like the senior buyer of a large organization or a single buyer of a small store. He could communicate with all of them. So I began to think, so do I want him to move away from those gifts and spend his time on filling out paperwork and so forth? Because if he does that, who's going to fill in and do what he does really well? Because I didn't feel like at the time I could do that. So it kind of hit me as, why don't I just let him be who he is and allow his strengths to play through the way they obviously play through? And he's been very successful at doing that. So that was a little bit of an eye opener for me. So now, that's the illustration, but you might be wondering, so how is this helpful? I mean, individualization. So I understand maybe trying to figure out where people's gifts are, but give me some practical advice of how this is helpful. Well, here's an example. So any relationship that you build is all built around communication. I mean, there are certainly, you have FaceTime and so forth, but it all centers around communication. And it all centers on trying to figure out that, the way I develop a relationship and communicate with one person might be totally different than the way I develop a relationship and communicate with somebody else. So here's my example. Fletcher and I, we were Fletcher now works with me, and so my son, and so we were heading to an account one day, and so we pulled in the parking lot. We got to the office, and he said, "Dad, how long is this meeting going to last, do you think?" And I said, "I don't know." And he looked at me and he said, "You don't know? I mean, didn't we schedule the meeting?" And I said, "I did schedule the meeting." He said, "Well, how long did you schedule?" I said, "I scheduled it for an hour." He said, "So it's going to be for an hour?" And I said, "No, I don't know." And I said, "Here's the deal. When we walk in within the first 3 minutes, I'll be able to tell whether they're going to give us 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or maybe an hour. But we need to figure that out early on, because we need to understand, how do they want to communicate? And so if they only want the 10-minute pitch, we don't need to give them the 45-minute pitch, because that's not how they communicate, and that's not how we can develop a relationship with them. We were there on their terms, meaning that we were requesting their time. So we need to honor how their personalities were, what their time was, how they wanted to be communicated. Did they need visuals, or did they just need facts? Did they want stories or not? And we needed to be able to discern that pretty quick. That's how individualization can help you in a relationship. Instead of stop trying to, sometimes as leaders, we have a tendency to say, "Hey, this is just the way I am. So if it's just the way I am, everybody's got to get used to dealing with me the way I am." And so if that's your attitude, that's fine. My guess, lovingly, is that you're going to be on an island if you're not already, and there's very few people there if you're going to take that approach. So now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to put something in the comments and respond to that a little bit. Did you know the word individualization? Do you understand what that is? Have you struggled with the fact that sometimes you might want people to get on your page more than you are willing to kind of stretch and get on their page? So put something in the comments. I'm going to leave you with 3 tips, but then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about anything that you put in there. I want to hear from you in regards to this word as well. All right, so let's move here. So ask, if you're wanting to get better at developing those relationships and looking at everybody as an individual person and trying to figure out their gifts and talents and where they play and how to develop a relationship with them, here's 2 questions that you can ask. One is, how do I stop imposing my relationship rules and regulations on others? You ever done that? You ever imposed your rules? It's like, I have a set of rules and you need to come and fit in my little box. Has that ever happened? Post something in the comments if that's happened to you. All right, next, ask this question. Actually, let's go to the next question. I think I skipped over one here. All right. How do I develop a relationship with others as opposed to relying on others to develop a relationship with me? So how do I do that? All right. So let's move forward. I'm going to skip a few slides here. As you can see, you know this is live because I got ahead of myself in posting that comment. But go ahead and post some comments if you have some thoughts in regards to that. But let me leave you with these 3 tips, and then we'll come back to comments, and then we'll be done. First of all, if you want to develop a relationship where you really look at that person as an individual and you're interested in their gifts and you're interested in being a part of that conversation and stretching yourself to try to develop the relationship with John that might be different than how you develop a relationship with Sally or Ben or whoever, number one, you got to determine the best way to communicate. The relationship is built on communication, so you've got to determine the best way to do that. And so let me tell you a simple way that I do that right now. If I meet with a client and I kind of kick them off, and so we're getting ready to do business together, here's a question I simply ask. So what's the best way to communicate with you? In other words, is it email? Is it text? Is it a phone call? Because I met with a client several months ago, and so when we were in our conversation, he said, boy, email's killing me. And he showed me his phone. He said, I have like 900 emails here I haven't even read. And when we left that meeting, I didn't let that go over my head. I made a mental note. I said, don't send the guy an email. I mean, it would be crazy to do that. That's not how he communicates. And so many times I find that when relationships start to struggle, even in an employer-employee relationship or even relationships as families, is we're not even on the same platform of how we're communicating. Sometimes our language is not right, but we spend time. Well, I sent an email, I didn't hear back. Well, I sent a text, I didn't hear back. Find out what platform somebody prefers to communicate and try to communicate on their ground rules and what works best for them. Number 2, identify one thing that person does better than you and affirm it. All right, here's why I'm saying that. It's because we get so hung up on the little things. You know, my friend, he was like, why can't he be organized? I was so hung up on that one thing, I almost forgot about all the phenomenal things that he does. So when you're sitting there so focused on that one thing that the person doesn't do, how about making a list? Just mentally say, you know what? Even though they irritate me, this is one thing they do really, really well. And affirm that in that particular person. That's a step towards individualization where you're recognizing those gifts. And then the next one, how can I adapt instead of forcing others to? Boy, that's hard, right? In other words, how can I be flexible to build that relationship? I'm not talking about being a chameleon where you realize you don't even have a personality anymore because Monday you act this way and Tuesday you act that way and Wednesday you act that way. But so many times we do get in our own little boxes, in our own little worlds, or our own island, as I said earlier. And if we do that and trying to force everybody to fit within our rules and regulations when it comes to our relationship, most likely our relationships are going to be limited and are never going to grow much at all. All right, let's look at a couple of comments and let's see what we have. So Melody here, great comment. Let me pull it down so you can see. She said, being in sales for years taught me I had to treat everyone individually. Absolutely. Let's look at what Christian's saying over here. Christian said, his comment says, I spent 12 years trying to find the right mix of office staff at my business. We needed 2 people who would work well together, stay in their lane, and be good fits with our GM. Not easy to do. Real jigsaw puzzle, that's for sure. Cindy Jordan, I need to know my strengths and weaknesses before I can impose myself on others. Well, that's true. Absolutely. I encourage you, if you're thought about Strength Finder, if you've never done that, just take that inventory. You go to Amazon, you buy the book. It's a Strength Finder 2.0, and it has a website and a code in there, and you enter the code and you take this inventory, and it'll quickly tell you what your top 5 strengths are. It's really interesting. Melanie here also, well, she's just being kind. She said, thanks, Tim, for these words. I'm enjoying them. Thanks, Melanie, as well, for being a part of this. All right, my time is almost up. Let me look and see if I've got any more. Melanie certainly agrees with you, Cindy. You certainly have to identify our strengths before we can impose those on others. So let me leave you. I want to spend a minute on this last slide. And this was something that was really enlightening to me today as I was really going back and I was looking at this word. As I said, it was one of my top 5 strengths. It's usually about number 3 or so. It's, I don't know whether I got it from trying to be a pleaser. In other words, I really, want to please people. And so I'm trying to develop those relationships in certain ways. But look at this book here, and many of you I'm sure have read it or heard about it. Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great. It's a great book. I highly encourage you to read it if you haven't. It's been out forever. New York Times bestseller. I love when Jim Collins talks about level 5 leaders. He talks about all level 5 leaders. These are like the top level of all industries. When he did a little research on that, he found that every one of them had one trait, one characteristic, one character trait in common, and that was humility. We might use that as a word one week, but humility is just if you're going to be a level 5 leader, you have to do that. And this may be a part of that discussion. But when I think about the book Good to Great, one of the things that's always talks about is that the line that everybody remembers in the book is this: Jim Collins says you got to get everybody on the bus, on your team, and you got to make sure that everybody gets on the right seat of the bus. It's important. They got to be on the right seat of the bus. And sometimes leaders of organizations will say, yeah, that's right. And if they can't get on the right seat of the bus, we need to throw them off the bus and out of the company, and they don't need to work here anymore, and so forth. And so here's something, as I was reflecting on this, here's something I want us to think about. One of the things that happens sometimes in organizations is that I agree that people need to be on the bus, first of all, but they need to be on the right seat of the bus. But sometimes great employees are not allowed to sit in the best seat for them. You ever thought about that? Sometimes leaders prevent great staff from sitting in a seat that might be different than what they wanted them to sit in. Now, I realize you may be hired for something, but the worst thing we can do as leaders is look at others and say, I don't want you using that gift because that's not really the seat that we want you sitting in. We want you to stay in this seat. And that's where a level 5 leader would never do this. And that's where you start to see the downfall of organizations. So let me tell you how you know when that happens. How many times have you seen an employee leave an organization and maybe get fired from an organization? And then they go and do something else, work somewhere else or whatever, and they achieve tremendous success. Perhaps it means that they've been able to accomplish being that level 5 leader. I think my camera has frozen, and I'm not sure why. So I'm going to go ahead and end it tonight. But if you can hear me, thank you for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you next week at 7 o'clock. Have a good evening.